Welcome or welcome back to Scripture Jots. My name is Father Rick Jaworski of the Companions of the Cross. In this 11th episode, we're taking a look at various odds and ends to do with Scripture. I thought I'd take a few moments to say a few things about Bibles. I want to start by talking about the Pontifical Biblical Institute. So, around the turn of the century, 1900, and specifically 1909, Pope Pius X established the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. The idea was to have a centralized place where you could bring in people from all over the world, train them in Scripture, and then send them back where they could be teachers in their own countries. So here's a place set up by the church to officially train teachers for Scripture, um, in the proper way, and so on. Now, when people take an undergraduate degree in theology and they have part of that degree is a certain amount of scripture study. Typically, if there's besides an intro sort of course to the Bible in general, usually there's sort of three courses to do with the Old Testament, three to do with the New Testament. With the Old Testament, usually there's a course to do with the Pentateuch, the first five books of the Bible. Then there's a course to do with prophetic literature, the prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, etc. And a course to do with wisdom literature. So you've got the book of Job, the book of Proverbs, excuse me, etc. And in the New Testament, the three are typically a course to do with the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, which are very similar, Johannine literature, John, etc., and Pauline literature, Pauline letters, and so on. And usually those are the courses that are in that sort of first Bachelor of Science level, Bachelor of Theology level program for theology in terms of covering Scripture. Now, I want to show something that the Pontifical Biblical Institute, that was set up to train people when they're going to go back to their own countries and teach other people, said about the Scripture. So here's some professors of the Pontifical Biblical Institute had set up sort of some guidelines or a program for this first cycle of theology. At least, okay, in this case, we're talking about the Old Testament, but probably the same thing goes for the New, where they said, on the whole, the majority of the demands may be answered by consulting. So if you have questions to do with about the Bible there, on the whole, the majority of the demands may be answered by consulting the New Jerusalem Bible. And basically, for archaeology and geography, look at the maps and the charts at the back. Uh, as an introduction to the various books and set groupings of books, Pentateuch, Prophets, Wisdom books, see the introductions to the particular books and the introductions to the larger sections in the Bible as a whole. And for history, look at the chronological tables at the back. And then for more information on particular points, you could consult some other works, and they go on, they give more bibliography. But I just thought interesting for this undergraduate program in theology for looking at sacred scripture. Basically, a good study Bible is going to give you the equivalent of all that you would need, even according to these professors from the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. So, I mean, they specifically mention New Jerusalem Bible and its notes and introductions and charts and tables and maps and so on. But I'm sure you could find an equivalent good study Bible of another modern translation with the same idea. So there you go. That would give you pretty much all you would need for that type of a thing. I'm just going to show my New Jerusalem Bible, what they're talking about. So, for example, the first five books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, they've got a whole introduction to the Pentateuch. Then before Genesis, do they give an introduction to Genesis? Not here. But I'm sure, like, for example, for prophetic literature, there's a section here, Introduction to the Prophets, where they talk about prophetic literature in general. Okay, well, I guess there's little sections on each of the individual prophetic books and so on. Another thing that's good about Bibles, I mean, I like ones where they have nice headings and subheadings. It's easier to find things. It's not just straight text. Um, there's a lot of indenting in here. You'll have easy to find verse numbers. You might have cross references. So let's see, for example, where say here, proclamation to John the Baptist, and he's quoting Isaiah in the margins. You can see what they're referencing to Isaiah, or it might show you if this is a passage in Mark, where are similar passages in Luke and Matthew and so on. Then, at bottoms of pages, you've got footnotes that can give more details or explain things. And then, as this thing said at the end, there are chronological tables, sort of in terms of history, timelines, to know important dates. You've got genealogies, the calendar, weights and measures, distance, capacity. It's the question for translations, are you going to put in the original word, or are you going to put it in modern terms? And then which thing? Are you going to put in kilometers or miles, or are you going to leave it as stadia and so on? And even measured money particularly might be a more difficult thing, because even if you set it at a particular time with inflation and increased cost of living, you might say, oh, well, that's not much at all, but it might be a whole day's wages. So, so we've got tables and indices, and various maps. The ancient Near East, the land of Israel, just major cities, major places. But there you go. Actually, I'm going to bring up one thing in terms of distances. Going to the book of Joshua, chapter 3, verse 4, where they're crossing the Jordan, and they're bringing the Ark of the Covenant with them, the Ark of the Covenant in which you had the Ten Commandments. So very precious, commandments given to them by God. The Ark was kept in the temple, in the tent, when they're moving around. But here, when they're crossing the Jordan, coming into the Holy Land, and they were given instructions. Between you and the ark, keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits. 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. So, going to the table at the end, in terms of distance, a cubit is about 18 inches. This works out to more than half a mile, or about 1 kilometer. And just for comparison purposes, sometimes I like to, think nowadays, well, this was just the Ten Commandments. With the Eucharist, we have Jesus himself, we have God himself in the tabernacle. And we can come so close. Just try and imagine something that's over half a mile or 1 kilometer away from where you are. That's how close you could come to the Ark of the Covenant. And yet how close can we come, to the tabernacle in a church, in a chapel? Just amazing, God's graciousness, his love for us, his presence with us, and our privilege. And we're not struck down for coming so close. They had to keep 2,000 cubits away, each cubit, 18 inches roughly. So in terms of Bibles, there's different purposes. You can have a Bible for study, and you can have a Bible for prayer. I would think that although study is great and it can help, prayer and reading the Bible is more important. And there, the most important thing would be a Bible that you're going to use. So whether you get a nicer one, nicer cover, nicer pages, whatever, as long as it uses. For study, though, you probably want something that's more of a formal equivalence. A lot of times they'll talk about Bibles. They're all going to be, unless you're reading in the original language, it's going to be a translation. And translations, you're going to have to make choices. A formal equivalence translation is one that's a little more word for word. A dynamic equivalence is a little more thought for thought, but there's going to be more interpretation involved in that. And so there could be more differences of opinion. So, for example, a Revised Standard Version or New Revised Standard Version is much more formal equivalence, as opposed to something like well, it might be more of an extreme edge, the message, which would be dynamic equivalence. Now, the thing is with formal equivalence, you might be able to see more things for study in the sort of word for word, even in order and making connections, but it might be a little more rough in reading it, not flow as smoothly, if you will. Something that's more dynamic equivalence might flow more smoothly, but as I said, there's more interpretation and other things. I just to go take a look. Well, here, if we're going to look at Mark's gospel, now this one it's a little more than just dynamic to make it more understandable, flow more. This putting in contemporary languages to try and make it more fresh, make it hit more, if you will, and its message sink in more. But you'll see, like you've got things like Jesus. Um, Jesus shut him up, you know, and then they got things. Everyone was incredulous, buzzing with curiosity. What's going on here? You know, so it's might hit you more fresh, but also though there are going to be things that I would disagree with. For example, here where he's casting out a man with an unclean spirit, it doesn't even say he's got an unclean spirit. Um, it says he was deeply disturbed. Okay, well, I think theologically that's gone too far, and maybe this is written by somebody who's not as believing in evil spirits, which would not be a good thing. So there's a risk of going a little too far, but also of more interpretation going on in a looser thing. Now, translation is going to change over time. Generally speaking, Bibles should be getting better and as more information comes up, getting more accurate translations, more manuscripts being discovered, and so on. But you can also lose some things sometimes too. For example, even if you go between the Revised Standard and a New Revised Standard, in the Revised Standard, just going to the beginning of Mark's Gospel, the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, "Behold, I send my messenger before thy face." Thy, in previous language, thee, thy, thou, thine, was the second person singular. So if we talk about person, first person, person speaking, I, singular, we, plural. Second person, person spoken to, you. Third person, person spoken about, he, she, it, singular, they, plural. And right now, everything's just you. And so you don't necessarily tell whether it's singular or plural. For example, sometimes in the Gospels it might be, is Jesus just talking to Peter, or is he talking to all the disciples when he says you here? You might have to go and look at the original Greek to find out. But just whereas before, it would be easier, singular, thee, thy, thou, and plural, you. But now it's just you and you. So that's a little bit of a loss or a difference there. Psalms. Let me go to, there we go, Psalm 1. Now, when the Bible was written, it was written at a time where, in terms of men and women and the way society worked, you're going to have language where, today, instead of man, sometimes we might say human, or the idea being that we want to include everybody. Now, before, man could be used to just mean man, or could be used to mean people in general. Just like in the Bible, a lot of times when it says sons, some translations nowadays are going to say sons, or you're going to say children. Uh, uh, or on a similar plane, bread. Bread is food, but it's a particular type of food. But in the Bible, bread can mean bread, or it could be used for food in general. But nowadays, if I go from the RSV, Revised Standard Version, to the NRSV, New Revised Standard Version, Psalms, to try and make it said that, look, no, this applies to women as well. Maybe before it used to be obvious, but they've changed. Well, blessed to happy, blessed is the man, blessed are those. They've pluralized it. Now there are some who also say that, well, before there could be more of a reference in a certain sense to Jesus, like Jesus is the perfect man that we're all to be like, the perfect human being that we're all to be like, and that So things like that might be more obvious or pick it up better when it was kept singular than if it's made plural, like happy are those. But again, these are some of these differences between uh, translations, even within the same one, RSV and RSV. Now, whether it's for prayer or study, if you're Catholic, you'd want to get a Catholic Bible. Now, the difference is that there were a whole bunch of writings out there, even in Jesus' time, and even for the Jewish people, and writings, which ones belong to the canon, which ones are sacred for us. And it differs between different groups of people. Even amongst Christians, Catholics and Protestants, there are different books that we consider sacred. We agree on some, but in other places there's a difference. And so a Catholic edition would have some books that some Protestant groups would not consider sacred and part of the Bible. But if you got a Protestant Bible, it wouldn't include those books. Now, so this one here says Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition. Now this NRSV here says with Apocrypha. These other books that were around at the time that would say weren't part of the Bible would be considered apocrypha. But this book here, it'll give you those extra Catholic books and even more. If I go to where I've got the marker, it goes through showing, the books that are in here. And then when it gets in terms of the Old Testament, the New Testament, they're the same, but in terms of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, it's got the Hebrew Scriptures, then the apocryphal or deuterocanonical books, and it's got ones here, books and editions that are in the Roman Catholic, Greek and Slavonic Bibles, so Tobit, Judith. There's some extra pieces of the Book of Esther and so on. Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, or Sirach, Baruch, and so on. First and Second Maccabees. But then it's got other books that, for example, so that's the end of the ones for Catholics. That should be part of our Bible. But then it goes on and gives even more. So First Esdras, 3 Maccabees, 4 Maccabees, that are part of some other people, like the Greek and Slavonic Bibles, but not in the Roman Catholic canon and so on. So you could get one that's with Apocrypha, but you're going to get then even more. Just you'd have to know which one is which. And what else did I want to say? That might be it for today. Today might be a very short one. So thank you very much. God bless you. I'm going to switch to my outro and thank you for watching.